Hi everyone, we're going to talk about the ketogenic diet today and why some people crash on the ketogenic diet. There's been some requests to discuss that, so here we are. Um, for those of you guys that don't know what the ketogenic diet is, it's basically a diet where 70% of the calories come from fat, 25% comes from carbohydrates. I'm sorry, 25% comes from proteins, and then 5% comes from carbs. So you're basically trying to limit your carbohydrate intake to a very small amount, less than 20 grams of carbohydrates per day. So those are the basic concepts of the ketogenic diet. Obviously, it's very popular today. Lots of people are doing it for various reasons. It's been very popular for people doing it for weight loss. In a clinical setting, in a medical setting, ketogenic diet has traditionally been used for dealing with epilepsy and seizure disorders, and found to be very effective for that, and a strong level of medical evidence that it really helps reduce epileptic seizures. And for many children that are suffering from various types of seizure disorders, being in a ketogenic diet seems to be very, very effective. When the brain is working off ketones, it tends to stop what are called epileptiform activity, these spontaneous discharges, and it's traditionally been used for that. Then as time has gone on, they find that ketogenic diets are very effective for causing weight loss and changing cardiovascular parameters. So now there's a strong level of evidence in the medical literature where ketogenic diets can reverse diabetes, can reduce hypertension, can change cholesterol, where the total cholesterol LDL go down, HDL goes up, triglycerides go down, significant impacts on vascular health and blood pressure. And part of the reason why those patterns take place, which is kind of contradictory to what people used to think, where fats would be bad for cardiovascular risk marker, is that when someone's on a ketogenic diet, their insulin levels drop sometimes almost as much as 50% in some studies. So insulin really seems to be the messenger that causes vascular inflammation and impacts different messengers that increase blood pressure and cause hypertension. And insulin is one of the key things that disrupts cholesterol metabolism. So one of the reasons why so many people that go on a ketogenic diet with high-fat diet do really well is really not because of, say, the fats, but when you eat fats, you have a reduced spike of insulin. And whereas sugar and carbohydrates cause a huge spike of insulin, and this is why when people have lots of sugar, lots of carbohydrates, they can gain weight easily, because when insulin levels are high, it's impossible to burn body fat. So for people that go on ketogenic diets, their insulin levels drop. So now there's an enzyme called hormone-sensitive lipase, which burns body fat, that is no longer inhibited, and then their body is more efficient in burning body fat. So it's become very popular for weight loss. It's used in the medical field, preventive medicine, diet, nutrition, lifestyle medicine field for diabetes and high blood pressure and abnormal cholesterol and cardiovascular parameters. And then there is some research that is very, very promising that comes out more and more each year, that it's very beneficial for reversing cognitive decline and dementia and early Alzheimer's, and can be very, very effective for traumatic brain injuries, that it helps reduce brain inflammation, and some other studies showing that it's also can be very beneficial, emerging evidence that it helps with different types of acne, and it also has some research with various cancers. But with all the cancer clinical trials, they're still using chemotherapy or the cancer treatment, the traditional cancer treatment, with ketogenic diets. And there are some of these early studies are finding that it seems to be beneficial when used with conventional therapy, because cancer cells use glucose, and ketones change the ability for some forms of cancer cells to not be able to have the fuel. So those are like the basic concepts of ketogenic diet. So let's talk about why people crash. Let's talk about what happens when people try to do it and go through all the steps. Now, I can tell you, when people decide, like, hey, I want to do a ketogenic diet, for whatever the reason may be, right? The most common is for people wanting to lose more body fat is probably the most common reason. But it's also really, really beneficial for people who have a blood sugar roller coaster ride all the time. For some people that just have poor brain function. In my practice, I use ketogenic diets with my patients with early signs of neurodegeneration that seem to be progressing quickly. I always use it with acute patterns of traumatic brain injury. I use it all the time for patients that are suffering from diabetes, but it's not like the diet that I think everyone should be on. I mean, it's a challenging diet, and for some people, they just don't want to follow those guidelines. And for many people, they don't need to. But for those people that have neurocognitive decline, diabetes, hypertension, or just want to have an efficient way to lose weight, the ketogenic diet can be effective. But there are some things that happen sometimes when people get into ketosis or try to get into ketosis. Well, first of all, one of the things that happens is when people start to follow the guidelines of a ketogenic diet and they increase their fat intake to 70% fat, 25% protein, 5% carbs, it takes several days to get into actual ketosis, where the body is making energy from ketones. And the key thing is when someone's transitioning, and this is an absolute must, you have to measure to determine if you're getting into ketosis. One of the biggest mistakes people make is they just kind of assume they're following the ketogenic diet, so they should be in ketosis, and that's not how it works. You cannot make any assumptions. So you can measure ketones in either urine, or you can measure ketones in blood. And if you measure ketones in urine, you just need a ketone urine strip. You can find those on Amazon, online, everywhere. The most important thing you need to know about urinary ketone strips is they have to not be expired. You have to have valid ketones. If you're using ketone strips that are expired, then you're going to get false readings and you're going to really be confused about what's happening. So make sure you get ketone strips that are not expired. And if you're following the ketogenic diet, which you'd expect to see is about the second or third day, you start to show up with urinary ketones. So it's usually, these ketone strips are like a beige piece of paper, and when you start to make ketones, they turn pink, and if you make a lot of ketones, it turns purple. But once a person starts to make some ketones and those color changes, then the person is technically in ketosis. You can also measure ketones with blood. The only issue with measuring it through blood is you have to get a ketone meter, which are not very expensive. I think they're like around $50. But ketone strips that you need for the ketone meters is really where the cost comes in, and they're like around $1 to $2 a strip. The most popular one being used today in healthcare is the Keto Mojo meter. You can find those online, and you can easily follow the guidelines. They have videos to show you how to use it. You basically do a prick, you get a sample of blood, and then you put it in the ketone meter, and it shows you if you're registering any ketones. Now, most important thing about measuring ketones with blood is there's a lot of information saying you're not really in ketosis if your levels are at least 1.0 or higher, and that's not necessarily true. So even with Keto Mojo's website, they put like if your levels of 0 to 0.5, that's not necessarily ketosis, and that's not true. If you make any level of ketones, you're in ketosis. So don't worry about having to reach really extremely high level ketone levels to think you're in ketosis. If you're doing serum ketones and you're above 0, you're in ketosis, and the physiological benefits of ketosis will take place. What happens in this entire field of nutrition, diet, sports nutrition world is they have everyone try to take exogenous ketones and then measure the ketones, which skews the test, and we'll talk about that in a second here. But the key thing is just if you're going to go into ketosis, avoid the most common mistake many people make, which is you really want to measure your ketones either with urine strips or with blood and confirm that you're actually in ketosis. Now, the number one reason why people don't get into ketosis, even though they're following the diet, is because they're eating too much protein. And the key thing is that 70% of the calories have to come from fat. So you really want to make sure that you're eating a high-fat diet. So, sometimes people just have like a big old steak and a little bit of vegetables and maybe something like a little fatty, like a little piece of avocado on top. But the protein content is so high that they're not really getting 70% of the calories from fat. So it really takes some time to plan out your meals and to follow some good recipes, and many of them are online, to really make sure that you're in ketosis. So the other key thing is that when you're getting into ketosis, is if you're not getting into ketosis and you're constantly eating too much protein, you actually don't feel good. You get into, some people call it the keto flu, where your body it doesn't have enough sugar and glucose to function like it needs to, but it's not really using ketones, and then that can cause some significant problems as well. So be aware of that. So make sure that if you're actually going to ketosis, you're not consuming way too much protein, and basically you got to think of very little carbohydrates. So stick with lots of different vegetables. Now, some other reasons people crash while they're going into ketosis is that, well, first of all, let's talk about the keto flu a little bit more. One of the things you can do to avoid the keto flu, by the way, if you're transitioning to ketosis where your body's trying to figure out how to use ketones but you're not getting enough from your diet, is you can take MCT oil and medium chain triglycerides, which are basically things like coconut oil. They can immediately convert into ketones, so more so than any other type of fatty acid, or like more so than fish oils or other types of fats like olive oil or something. So MCTs can immediately convert into ketones, and if you're going through the transition from a normal diet into a ketogenic diet and you're starting to get that keto flu, you can just take some capsules of 2 or 3 capsules, 1 capsule. You can play with the dose that works best for you while you're transitioning into ketosis. Now, some people use exogenous ketones, but the problem is exogenous ketones are supplements you can take. You can find them on any Amazon, any health food store, and beta-hydroxybutyrate are basically exogenous ketones. The problem is if you're taking exogenous ketones, your urinary test and blood test are going to be skewed. So you may think you're actually getting into ketosis, but it's just measuring the high amount of ketones you just took. So it's better to use MCT oil if you're transitioning and wanting to measure your levels accurately to see if you're getting into ketosis than using exogenous ketones like beta-hydroxybutyrate. So that's another key concept. So get into ketosis, use MCT oil to avoid the ketogenic flu, to help your body have some fuel energy as you make the transition. Also, on a side point, never use MCT oil if you're not in ketosis. If you're eating a normal diet with high insulin surge, with normal insulin surges, and not in a ketogenic state, MCT oil it's a saturated fat. It's going to cause significant inflammation. It's not good for you in non-ketogenic states if you're still eating carbohydrates for most people. So things like MCT, which are quite popular now for supporting the brain and cognition, really are saturated fats. So you only want to use them when you're actually in ketosis. And the difference being in ketogenic state is that your insulin levels are not high. And the dangerous combination is saturated fat with high insulin levels. So when you're in ketosis and your insulin levels are dropped because you're only getting your calories, about 5% of calories from carbohydrates, 25% protein, 70% from fat, you don't have those high insulin levels. So MCT gets converted right away into energy without causing those oxidative inflammatory responses. So be aware of that. So just as a review, one of the ways to not crash going to ketosis is to use things like MCT oil as you transition, and then make sure you're in ketosis by measuring your numbers. You should know, if you have not done a ketogenic diet before, the worst part is the first few days. Could be 3 days, could be up to 5 days before you get into ketosis. And then once you're in ketosis, you should have really stable energy and you should feel great. The other good thing about research that's been done in ketogenic diets is that it really has been shown to control appetite. That when you're eating your calories 70% from fat, you're not really hungry. So the compliance rate of ketogenic diets is much higher than, for example, low caloric intake or low carbohydrate intake by its own. So if you actually are eating a high-fat diet to promote ketosis, then usually your appetite shouldn't be an issue. And if you're doing the ketogenic diet correctly, as you transition, you should not be hungry doing it. So you just may not be. Now that's another clue. You're not getting enough fat if you're doing the ketogenic diet. You're trying to get into that transition, but you're starving. So, usually when people are still after first day, second day, third day are starving, trying to get into ketosis, it's just screaming to them that they are not getting enough fat in their diet. So whether they take avocado and put olive oil over it and eat it that way, or get some sardines, get some really healthy fat, that's one way to really make sure you're having a healthy transition. Okay? So one of the main reasons why people crash getting into ketosis is they're not actually getting to ketosis and they're not getting enough fat. So they get stuck in that so-called keto flu, where they're not feeling good and just thinks that they feel awful and this doesn't work for them. So let's talk about some other reasons. Another reason why people totally crash and have a hard time transitioning to ketosis is because they really go into a high dairy diet. And dairy is very inflammatory. So one of the most common things you see is people get into ketosis, but they're like, I've never been so inflamed, my body hurts. Ketones are anti-inflammatory. Ketones should not cause anyone to be inflamed. The only reason you would be inflamed and your body would hurt and swell is because something you're eating is driving your immune system. Most common culprit is dairy. So what happens with a lot of people that go into a ketogenic diet is they try to get their fat from dairy. So they put cheese on all their eggs and they put cheese on everything, and they just constantly have a high dairy intake diet, and they basically get super inflamed. So they can achieve ketosis, but they feel awful because their body's so swollen and so inflamed from all that milk protein, casein being specifically the milk protein part of it. So, and some people may not notice their sensitivities to casein because they just have it occasionally and it's not that significant, but once they go into ketosis, their levels of milk protein, which is casein, increases, and that causes significant inflammation. So if you're going into ketosis or you're in ketosis and you feel really inflamed and your body hurts and you got brain fog and you can't think, and you don't want to move your muscles because your muscles just feel like they have no energy and feel heavy, that means you're systemically inflamed. Something you're eating is causing that. It may not be milk protein. It could be something else you added recently to your diet, so be aware of that. Okay, so that's another reason why people have a hard time transitioning to ketosis, because they crash. Our third reason why people fall apart and have a hard time getting to ketosis is because they get too inflamed from eating not so much from dietary proteins causing an immune response, but just having too much oxidative stress. And what I mean by that is their diet is basically bacon, fried food. You have to realize that fried food actually produces something called glycated end products, and glycated end products drive systemic inflammation. So one of the reasons why people get into ketosis, and again, if you feel swollen and inflamed, your body hurts, and if it's not dairy or milk protein, you just may be eating too much fried food or too much unhealthy fat. So the ideal way to get into ketosis is to eat healthy fats. The best healthy fats are different types of oils like olive oil, avocado oil. If you can tolerate eggs, the yolk in eggs has high amounts of healthy fats. The other sources would be like fishes, fatty fishes, sardines, salmon, really, really high fat intake. Those would be really ideal sources of getting really healthy fats into your system. So, doing things like saturated fats, fried food, fried bacon, fried zucchini, fried whatever, eating a lot of fried foods can really cause inflammation, oxidative stress, especially if you already have low antioxidant status. So some people, when they try to get into ketosis, they just fall apart because they're getting way too much glycated end products from their fried foods that causes significant inflammation. So be aware of that. Another reason people have a hard time transitioning into ketosis, into a ketogenic state, as they follow the guidelines, is they don't have enough fiber. Your permitted vegetables on a ketogenic diet, it's not an Atkins diet. Atkins diet, people are eating tons of fat all the time and and not much vegetables. It's not a carnivore diet. Ketogenic diet, you really need to do it with lots of diverse vegetables. So vegetables that are not underground vegetables like potatoes and yams, but other types of vegetables that are not underground, like kale, like spinach, like cabbage, all the different things you can use in a great salad. Those don't have high carbohydrate intake. So eating lots of healthy vegetables is critical to help support your microbiome. So we know that research on the microbiome really shows that within even 1 day to 3 days, the microbiome can change by your diet intake. So sometimes people, by the time they follow a ketogenic diet for 3 to 5 days and follow it, and if they're not eating enough diverse vegetables, they can really throw off their microbiome and just not feel good, and they can also feel inflamed and not doing well. So that's another main reason why people have a hard time crashing and going to ketosis. I think that was third mechanism. So fourth mechanism where people have a hard time getting to ketosis is because they have a gallbladder problem. So this is something we should talk about just for a few minutes, and then we get into some questions. So the key thing also to know is that some people have gallbladder function difficulty. And what I mean by that is the gallbladder has a tendency to have its bile become thick, and if the bile becomes thick, it's referred to in the medical literature as gallbladder sludge, and that can be picked up on an ultrasound, and then eventually the sludge forms into a stone, which can be gallstones. And ultimately what happens when a person's gallbladder starts to become sludgy and start to form into stones is that they become inefficient in releasing bile. And bile is essential to break down fat from your diet. So one of the things that will happen when people have gallbladder issues is they're typically, without even knowing it, they tend to avoid fatty foods or fried foods because they feel really bloated and distended. But when they try to go into a ketogenic diet, they just feel awful. Their bowel function changes in a negative way. They get constipated. They can have increased bowel motility. They can have floating stool. They can feel bloated and distended all the time. They just feel kind of, sometimes people will say they just feel disgusted in how they feel. They just feel sluggish and weak and all that. And in those scenarios, you really may not be able to do a ketogenic diet. Now, your biggest clue that you may have a gallbladder issue is that when you eat anything that's fatty, has like olive oil, or maybe even fried food, or you had a French fry or something like that, and you get immediately distended or bloated, or if you take fish oils and you get bloated, or if you take fish oils and you keep burping up all the time, those are clues that you may not have a very fit gallbladder. And the other key thing is if you feel like sometimes in the morning you have a bitter metallic taste in your mouth, that's some bile regurgitation that also happens when the gallbladder is not working so well. So be aware of that. And if you have gallbladder related issues, we might have to do another talk just on that, because there's a lot of things to talk about with that topic alone. But you may not be able to do well on a ketogenic diet. So be aware of that. So you can absolutely change your gallbladder function over time and then try a ketogenic diet. But if you're feeling really bloated, distended, not feel well, then that could be related to a gallbladder problem. So those are the main mechanisms that cause people to have difficulty transitioning into ketosis. There could be some other ones as we talk about. Let me also clarify a few things. Ketogenic diet does not disrupt thyroid function in a negative way, and ketogenic diet is not contraindicated in Hashimoto's. This is what we call internet regurgitation of people who don't know how to read research. It's just what it is. People that get into, there's a few papers that show T3 levels change when people get into a ketogenic diet because they're having low carbohydrates. That's fine. That is part of normal physiology when you don't have enough carbohydrates. That doesn't disrupt the thyroid gland function. Your body metabolizes calories differently when you're on a low carb diet. So that's one thing. Secondly, there's actually been a clinical study published that ketogenic diets actually lower thyroid antibodies, and they have major benefits in dampening autoimmunity because ketones are anti-inflammatory and they stop blood sugar spikes, which can tend autoimmunity. So, despite what you have people write about, you have people trying to interpret literature where they don't understand low carbohydrate diet, they don't understand the concepts of statistical significance, and they don't understand how metabolism changes in a low carbohydrate state with T3. So if you are in any one of these forums, just know there's a whole rumor going out there that you can't do ketogenic diet with Hashimoto's or thyroid problems, and that is absolutely incorrect information. And unfortunately, it's regurgitated on a lot of websites by notable thyroid experts. What can you do? So that's one thing that I know is a question that typically comes up all the time. All right, so those are the main things. I know my lovely wife, Dr. Reyes, is here to help me
Hi.
with questions. So,
I have one, and your lovely dog.
And my lovely dog Lily, which
Oh my gosh.
if you ever hear bark.
You're gonna hear her bark. Sorry, the dog walker couldn't make it today. Oh boy.
By the way, thank you for everyone for joining in. It's so nice when you guys list where you're coming in from. It's so cool to see people from different countries say hi and let us know where they're from. So thank you for doing that. Okay, some questions. Yeah.
Yes, I've got to tell you, quite a few questions about thyroid.
Oh yeah, thyroid. Yeah,
and
I know.
So I have to cross this off now, but that's it. Really, people get confused.
Yeah.
Okay. So Tamara asks, hi, by the way, how are you?
Good.
Good. Okay. Tamara asks, what about improving endurance training in keto?
Yes. So ketogenic diet can really make a big impact on endurance training. So if you look at muscles, you have fast twitch muscles, and then you have slow twitch muscles, and slow twitch muscles are for endurance. And actually what they find is that when people do long endurance activities like running, they actually can switch the expression of some of these muscle fibers and how they use energy. And being able to switch to ketosis is actually critical for people to be able to do long-term exercise. So normally you should also know that humans by design have always been in states of ketosis in between hunting and gathering food. And it isn't until the development of modern civilization where people had to have 3 meals per day, and three large meals per day with lots of carbohydrates, refined carbohydrates, that everything started to go south and lots of chronic diseases started to develop. So many long-term athletes actually are very efficient in their ketogenic states. And the longer body stays in ketosis and the longer people do long endurance pathways, the pathways that activate ketones for energy become much more efficient. So it's no problem for endurance activity. Now, you may notice as you transition from regular blood sugar physiology to ketosis and that keto flu transition in that first week, you may not be as efficient. But once you finally get into ketosis, and especially if you adapt within a couple weeks and your body's using ketones very effectively, you may be able to go longer with your endurance exercise than you've ever had before.
Okay, so Catherine and a few other people are asking, would you please clarify, when you say we can use MCT oil as we transition into ketosis, does this mean use it during those 3 to 5 days?
Yes.
When first starting to eat ketogenic, but not yet producing ketones?
Yes. So remember, MCT is not actually ketone, so it's not going to throw off your actual urinary test or your blood test. So if you're actually not eating sugar and saturated carbohydrates and your body shifting to ketosis, you can, in a sense, not have enough glucose metabolism, and your body's still trying to use ketones, but it's not very efficient breaking down your own body fat for ketones. So having some MCT immediately allows you to function. So just like people can become hypoglycemic, people can become hypoketoemic in a sense. Their ketone levels can be too low. So be aware of that. So if you're transitioning to ketosis, there could be times your body just isn't efficient making ketones, and you don't want to throw yourself out of ketosis. So you can take some MCT oil and still get accurate results with your urinary test and blood test to determine if you're in ketosis. So it's the most efficient way to it's the most efficient food source to immediately go into ketones that isn't actually ketones. So your body will use them as it needs to.
Okay.
During that transition.
Yeah. Lots of hypothyroid questions.
Yeah, by the way, all the thyroid people that are here, please tell people that stop the rumors. I mean, that's it.
Any research you can point into?
The research, just go to the medical literature. It's all there. People that are again, just I don't know what to say. Maybe we'll do a talk on that separately one day. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. Lisa asks, would you suggest doing keto with a patient who has MS? They also has a problem, and she's saying bile, but I think it's BIAL she's filling. I think she means bile like gallbladder.
Gallbladder issues,
I think, yeah.
So you can never really, it's always going to be difficult for anyone to do a ketogenic diet if they have gallbladder issues. So that's its own issue. And also, just to point out, because I know this question is going to come up, if you've had your gallbladder removed, you still, what happens is your gallbladder, there's this duct called the cystic duct that then goes to the gallbladder. When they cut the gallbladder out, the cystic duct pooches out and kind of becomes like a new stubby little gallbladder. So you can still have all the symptoms of gallbladder issue and still have bile sludge in your new cystic duct pouch of your replacement for your gallbladder. So you still need to do the dietary lifestyle strategies to impact gallbladder function, which is just basically reducing fat and thinning out bile is a basic concept. Now, if they have MS, you would hope to get them there. There's two clinical studies not published where they used ketogenic diets and it really helped with the recovery of multiple sclerosis. And the interesting thing about ketones, and ketones are not just fuel sources. Ketones are actually anti-inflammatory messenger and mediator compounds. And ketones have a profound impact in dampening microglia. These are immune cells in the brain, pathways for inflammation. So they do help recovery. And in my practice, when I work with neurodegenerative, neurological autoimmune disease like MS or even traumatic brain injuries, they do much, much, much better getting into ketosis than if they're not. So you definitely want to consider with MS patients. But if they have a gallbladder issue, you're not going to be able to do it. You're going to have to get their gallbladder under control and then jump into it.
Okay. And then I know you mentioned this, but a lot of people are asking, is a keto diet beneficial for hypoglycemics?
Yes. By the way, I didn't mention this, if you are struggling with hypoglycemia, like you just can't get your blood sugar levels stable and you're crashing and you have to eat every 2 hours, and no matter, even if you eat high protein and you just can't get your blood sugar stable, one of the ways to give your adrenal glands and your blood sugar regulating system as a break is to shift into ketosis. So what happens with many people that are hypoglycemic, and let me just define what that means. So some people have what's called a functional hypoglycemia. So their lab tests may still look normal when they measure their fasting glucose, because they're using a range of 65 usually to 99 with most labs. But their glucose levels could be below the 85 range, and the key thing with them is that they have symptoms of shakiness, lightheaded, irritability between meals. They eat, they feel better, they usually crash in the afternoon, they typically have a hard time sleeping through the night, they wake up in the middle of the night into a nocturnal hypoglycemia response. But with those patients that have hypoglycemia patterns, for sure what's happened is they've lost their resiliency in order to get their blood sugar levels back up. So when your blood sugar levels drop, your pancreatic alpha cells have to release glucagon to get it back up, and then your adrenal glands have to release catecholamines and cortisol to get blood sugar levels back up. For some people, they've been hypoglycemic for 10, 20, their whole teenage adult life. Their pathways just become depleted, and they have this tendency to be hypoglycemic ongoing, even though they don't have a disease. So for them, sometimes just getting into ketosis for a few months can really help those alpha cells of the pancreas and adrenal glands recover, and they feel a lot better afterwards. So ketogenic diets are absolutely a good idea for people that are constantly struggling with hypoglycemia.
Okay. George asks, when would you recommend the AIP diet versus the standard keto diet?
Well, if you have an autoimmune disease, the guidelines of an autoimmune paleo diet still have to be incorporated into a ketogenic diet. I mean, autoimmune paleo diet, you basically have to go off gluten and grains, which are already keto, and then you got to be concerned with lectins and nightshades, especially if you have autoimmunity, and especially if you have autoimmunities where you have agglutination, like things like rheumatoid arthritis. Not all autoimmune disease patients are sensitive to lectins and nightshades, but many are. So you basically, if you have autoimmunity, you follow the restrictions of an autoimmune paleo diet, which is no gluten, no dairy, no grains, no nightshades, and it's really falls right in place with being in a ketogenic diet. So you just eat the vegetables that are not nightshades or lectins in a ketogenic diet, and you eat healthy amounts of fats, and no problem for someone to follow both guidelines.
Okay, Arlene from Paris.
Paris.
Bonjour, bonsoir, Arlene.
Our favorite city.
Paris.
Yes. Question.
Est la nuit là-bas? Isn't it night there?
Oh.
Trying to impress you with my French.
Nice.
I started ketosis because I suffered from chronic insomnia and had adrenal HPA axis dysfunction. Mm-hmm. Can keto help with HPA axis dysfunction and adrenal problems?
Absolutely. It's probably, ketogenic diet's also another great reason another thing to consider if you're constantly dealing with these HPA axis adrenal functional issues. Because once you get into ketosis, that whole blood sugar roller coaster ride and that constant stress on the adrenal glands to get blood sugar levels back up, it's gone. It's no longer a factor. It gets a chance to rebuild. It's much more effective than, some people have adrenal-related functional imbalances and try to take, adaptogens and B vitamins and all these adrenal gland supplements with very limited effects. The most effective thing you can actually do to give your adrenal glands a break, especially if you're having nocturnal hypoglycemia, is to just get into ketosis.
Okay.
I will also mention another question comes up quite. How long do you have to be in ketosis? When do you take breaks?
That's a good question.
Oh, really?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So the key thing is, when you first start, you want to go and get into ketosis and stay in it for as long as you can so your body can get it adapted to it. So once you struggle for 3 to 5 days to get into ketosis, last thing you want to do is break it and then start all over again. So I would say once you get into ketosis, try to go as long as you can. And the longer you're in it, the more efficient your body becomes using the metabolic pathways to use ketones, to process and make ketones and to use ketones for energy. And then at some point, you should take a break. For some people, it's like maybe 3 weeks into it or a month into it. For some people, it's a special occasion. But you should take a break. And then you should, maybe... It depends what your clinical goals are. I mean, if you have seizures, you may not be able to take a break, because if you take a break, you have your seizure flare up, and it could be a problem. But if your goal is just for, let's say, some adrenal gland recovery, or just to control your autoimmunity, or just to control your diabetes, or whatever, even weight loss, whatever your goals are, it is important to take a break. And then once you take a break, it shouldn't be as hard to get back into it. Now, if some people have been doing ketogenic diets for 10 years, many years, they all occasionally still take breaks and get out of ketosis and maybe celebrate and have go to a wedding and have champagne and have wedding cake and whatever they want to do, and then they transition back into it. And the more adapted their body is to being in ketosis, the faster they can get back into it once they break it.
Okay, there's a lot of gallbladder questions, so I'm going to try to summarize these. Okay, sure. Leah says, I love the keto positive effects. However, would you suggest it to clients who have sluggish/sludgy gallbladder who struggle with dietary fats?
No.
And there's a couple add-ons to that. Beyond enzymes, what do you recommend?
Right. So if people have gallbladder issues, we'll have to do a talk on that. But basically, these things you can do with people who have gallbladder issues is get them to stop eating fats. That's number one. Lots of research shows actually coffee does help. So if they're drinking coffee, that's useful. Dandelion root is an herb that helps thin bile. That's like, I'm just giving you some of the basics. Dandelion root is something that helps thin bile that can be used. And if you really have to get rid of stones and it's really thick, then just what are called bile salts, ox bile salts, can be very effective, and they help thin bile. The problem with ox bile salts is that they also activate what are called FXR receptors in the gastrointestinal tract, which increase motility. So for some people, if they take it, they'll have watery bowel movements and totally fall apart. And for other people, they can tolerate a small dosage of it, but not long term. And there's been a couple published case studies in the literature where they've shown pre and post gallbladder change with that. And I have one I'm trying to summarize to publish soon too on that. But those are the basics.
Okay, and then the follow-up of that is, do you endorse a gallbladder flush?
Do I endorse a gallbladder flush?
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. I can't endorse anything. I mean, what do I to endorse anything? I don't know what that really means. Gallbladder flushes have some controversial issues in the actual medical literature. There was a paper published, I believe it was The Lancet, where they showed people that did gallbladder flushes have these basically just fat. These round stones are nothing more than fat and bacteria, that they're not actually gallstones. So other people have argued that. And the key thing is, if you do a gallbladder flush, basically, if you see all these little round things in there, those are not gallstones. That's just what happens when you follow the gallbladder flush, where you basically take Epsom salt and olive oil and drink that and line your side, and then you have this crazy bowel movement because of the Epsom salt having magnesium and causing that gallbladder contraction with the high amount of fat, like in some olive oil. But for some people, is that a bad idea? I don't know. For some people, they feel a lot better. I mean, I've had patients that they do that occasionally. They feel a lot better. It may be getting rid of some sludge in the gallbladder. It's just, I think the problem becomes controversial when people make the assumption that they're actually getting rid of gallstones. Is that possible that it could happen? Yes, but absolutely the little round things that come up in the stool after they do the flush are usually just fat and bacteria. As long as you know that, those are the key things. I'm definitely not against it, but I would say, the caution that's always thrown out there is someone has some gallstones. Do you cause the gallstone obstruction if you do it? Which is always the medical concern.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Connie's asking, is it important to transition off of keto diet? She says she's going on the diet for 4 weeks, then she's going on vacation for a week in Puerto Vallarta, lucky, for a week, and then she's going to do it on return. Does she need to transition off it before she goes to her vacation, or do you know what I mean?
Well, I would think you probably want to be in ketosis on your flight. I'm sure there's not good food, and it's easier to stay have energy and hunger if you're not in it. Typically, no matter what, the first meal you eat after ketosis is going to be a little bit of a rush. You may not want to go with the highest carbohydrate intake. You might want to go with like a high fiber. If you're going to eat a little bit of carbohydrates, make sure it's really high in fiber, like a piece of fruit or something, versus like, I don't know, a martini, sugar-filled martini or something like that, or just a glass of red wine or something. I would say transition to some fiber with some sugar intake, and having fiber will slow down your glucose surge when you eat. So try to have some fiber, food high in fiber as your first meal.
Okay. Is it safe to be on keto if you are celiac?
Yes, there's no contraindications for being on ketogenic diet if you're celiac. As a matter of fact, I can tell you from working with lots of celiac disease patients, many of them feel a lot better in ketosis. And the interesting thing about ketosis is that, again, ketones have an anti-inflammatory effect. The key thing is that they're just eating healthy fats and not eating unhealthy fats. So no problem for any kind of autoimmune disease being in ketosis. And the other key thing is that ketones have been shown to dampen and heal neuroinflammatory responses. In many patients that actually have celiac disease, which is an exaggerated immune response to gluten, they have an exaggerated T-cell response to gluten genetically, if their gut gets really, really inflamed, is that they actually get injury to the nerve plexus of their gut. And many times being in ketosis helps them heal that gut issue, and they notice a big difference over a period of a couple months in their motility and their gut function as they can dampen the fire in their gut from ketones.
Okay. A lot of people are asking about, you can recommend meal plans or things.
I know. I can't recommend meal plans. I cannot. I think we have some articles maybe on our website for it. There's a lot of information out there, I don't play chef. I don't play any of that stuff. All I can just share with you is the clinical research information. There's lots of great people, much more qualified than me, that have great recipes and menus and follow keto lifestyles, and right. I would suggest you follow them.
Right. Okay. Ashley's asking, what type of protein powder do you recommend on ketosis, if any? And she likes her shakes and can't figure out if it's the right to use protein powders and what kind.
Every protein powder is a problem. It's just that simple. If you are, for most, okay, well, let me take it back. If you have a chronic inflammatory condition or a chronic disease, you should not be even playing this protein powder game. Proteins get hydrolyzed. They become metabolized into different proteins that are very antigenic, especially things like whey protein. Even some of the vegetable proteins. Just eat real food. The problem with the way that process proteins to make it into a powder is that they become very, very reactive. So it's better not to use any powders especially if you have a chronic inflammatory condition and so forth. In general, I'm not a big fan of protein powders. Mm-hmm. If you have a chronic illness, which is most of my patients that I work with. But if you don't have a chronic illness, if you want to use a protein powder, then that's fine. I don't know what the best ones are, because in the world I live in, we were trying to constantly deal with inflammation and autoimmunity and stuff, so I don't have a lot of knowledge of what the best ones are if you don't have a chronic inflammatory condition.
Okay. Amy's asking, it's kind of a long question. I check my...
I'm sorry, one last thing. If you're getting into ketosis, they do make ketone powder drinks. You can use those. You just know your laboratory results are not normal. So they do have like beta hydroxybutyrate, and like there's a lot of ketone powder drinks out there if you need energy while you're in ketosis. And they also contain electrolytes. So that can be very helpful because also when you're in ketosis, you can get your sodium and potassium levels and your essential mineral levels depleted pretty quickly when you're in ketosis, especially if you've been in it for more than a week or so. So if you go to Amazon or your online store and you go into ketosis, instead of using a ketone powder, you can just use beta hydroxybutyrate powders. You got to be careful when you read them because some of them use a high amount of sugars like stevia, and that can make you have sugar cravings. So even though stevia technically is not a sugar, it still causes sugar cravings with people. So you got to be aware of those. And then also some of the ketone powders out there are loaded with caffeine because many people are using these for weight loss. So you may want to find one that isn't loaded with a lot of stevia and a lot of caffeine if you're just wanting to use it throughout the day for some energy.
Okay. This is Amy saying, I check via blood ketone strips. I've never heard of the keto flu because of too much protein. I always was told it was a metabolic shift and transition of electrolyte balance. Thus, people feel better after supplementation with appropriate electrolytes.
Yeah, it's not related to protein. The reason people have a keto flu is because their body doesn't know how to use ketones efficiently yet. And you do make a good point. You can use electrolytes. You can, especially potassium, to help when you're transitioning into it. So using things like just like a general mineral, potassium, some salt can help as well. Some people get keto flus because their body's inefficient, and some people just get low in electrolytes. But it's not the high protein content. So that's another good point. Thank you for bringing that up. If you are having a hard time transitioning to ketones, you may also want to start taking some some basic supplemental electrolytes to help you. That can help you with your energy levels in your transition.
Okay. Meredith is asking, are you including collagen powder as a protein powder that is not recommended if you have chronic inflammatory condition?
Yes. Collagen powder I don't use that often, again, because people have autoimmunity. Again, the process of taking proteins and converting them into a powder, the hydrolyzation of proteins makes them more inflammatory, more antigenic for most people. So that's just in general. But as far as regular proteins go, if you don't have an inflammatory disease, you can use collagen powder. There seems to be a lot of benefit with collagen powder, helping the gut heal and providing a good source of protein as well.
Okay. Why does fasting glucose often increase for those in ketosis?
It doesn't. Fasting glucose does not elevate when people are in ketosis. If it does, that's something as unusual. You actually don't see that. So I don't know why that's happening, but that's not a common response. So it would be atypical. You would go, what happened? And you would be concerned about lab error if you saw that. You typically don't see fasting glucose elevate.
If they're truly in ketosis.
Yeah.
Okay. Susan, can you please speak about ketosis and vegetarianism?
Ketosis and vegetarianism. Let's see. Yeah, you could absolutely do it. You're just gonna have to get you can eat lots of healthy fats. You should be able to do it. You're probably gonna need to eat cheese. I believe like some of the vegan cheeses could be better options, like made with coconut milk, so you don't get that high animal casein content. So you do avoid some of the inflammatory responses, but can absolutely be done. You're gonna have to put a lot of olive oil and fats on all your veggies and salads. You may want to also mix oils. You want to have a mixture of olive oil and avocado oil and flaxseed oil and coconut oil and different types of things you can mix into your salads and veggies.
Okay. While on ketosis, are there supplements to take to support your adrenals, HPA axis, thyroid, etc.?
You can take all the regular supplements for your adrenal glands that are out there to give you some additional support, but there's nothing unique or special. Most common thing people use are what are called herbal adaptogens, and basically B vitamins is really what most adrenal product supports are.
Okay, Todd is saying, I don't know if he's a question or he's making a statement. Why can't the people with gallbladder issues take bile salts to help them emulsify fats?
They can. That's one of the things we talked about. People can take bile salts. If you take too much of them, you can get a watery bowel movement. And then also, the other thing to add in if you have gallbladder issues that I didn't mention is you can take lipase as a digestive enzyme. So people have gallbladder issues, they can take a lipase to help them digest their fats as well.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. K and team.
Welcome.
Can you please go over what's the best way to test for being in ketosis? Is it urine, breath, blood? Which do you prefer?
Yeah, breath testing isn't reliable yet. I don't think the equipment and machines are there as potential, but I don't think what's available in the market right now is reliable. Blood is going to be the best way to measure, and then urine would be it's okay too. It's definitely the cheapest because you can buy a bunch of ketone strips, and you don't have to prick yourself to get the measurements. But blood is the best measurement.
Okay. What do you think about bulletproof coffee or coffee with MCT oil and butter?
That's great. That's a common strategy a lot of people use in ketosis. They follow the bulletproof, I guess they call it lifestyle now, where they wake up in the morning, have coffee. Caffeine also helps you get into ketosis. Caffeine stimulates catecholamines stimulate hormone-sensitive lipase, which is the pathway used to break down triglycerides to ketones. So some people wake up in the morning, and for the first meal, they'll have coffee, and they'll put some kind of fat in there, either oil or butter, coconut oil or ghee or some kind of butter. And if they can tolerate the protein, it seems to be a really good way for them to have sustained energy throughout the day, and works great with many people while they're following a ketogenic diet.
Okay, Sean is asking, how does the reference range change for thyroid hormones on a ketogenic diet? Does it look like low T3 syndrome or ESS? I don't believe this is addressed in your thyroid book.
It's not a consistent pattern. There's just paper that when someone gets into a low carbohydrate state, your body doesn't need as much T3 to metabolize fuel. So T3 levels go down from baseline. You may not even see anything wrong with your lab test. And this is, again, where we have a problem with interpretation of published studies in real practice, in real life. You would probably never see any actual change in someone's thyroid panel in any way when someone's in a ketogenic diet. When they do studies and they compare baseline to the effect of a low carbohydrate over time, they can see some change in T3. And of one of those papers, it was very slight, and the other paper was not even statistically significant, meaning that it could have just been due to chance. So it's not really a factor anyway. You won't see any changes in your lab test.
Okay, go ahead. Sorry? Kathy's asking, is a ketogenic diet possible for someone with SIBO, or is paleo better?
Is a ketogenic diet better for someone
possible
with SIBO?
For someone with SIBO, or is paleo better?
I don't know what the word better is. Depends what your goals are. Yeah. Obviously, with SIBO, you have to follow the FODMAP restrictions, or you get bloating and distension. And I know we have a talk on SIBO plan as one on our list because there's been a request for that. But if your goal is to try to increase ketones because it has benefits for your brain, it has anti-inflammatory effect, and can really speed up weight loss since insulin levels drop, then that would be a better approach than, let's say, what was the other option? Paleo?
Sure.
Paleo. Most people do paleo because they're trying to get their antigenic load down. So those are the things to think about. Okay,
another thyroid question. Can your thyroid meds become more absorbed and overdosed on the keto diet?
Well, certainly anytime you do a drastic change in your diet, there's individual uniqueness to thyroid replacement and thyroid hormones, but it's not common. So most people that go in ketosis don't necessarily feel that the dose they're taking causes them to get wired and hypersensitive and so forth. But especially if they're eating enough fiber. If they're eating plenty of fiber on the ketogenic diet, then those things don't typically happen. If people are just avoiding fiber and just eating nothing but fat and meat, that's more likely to happen, but it's still very rare. So it's possible, but it's not common.
Okay. Jufel is saying, I'm insulin resistant. Why do I typically want to have a bit of sweet after a meal?
Because you're insulin resistant.
Because you just answered yourself.
Well, if you're insulin resistant, what happens is you can't get glucose into the cells, so there's messengers sent to your appetite centers in your hypothalamus that you need more sugar. One of the most effective ways published in the literature to completely reverse insulin resistance and even diabetes is ketosis, because insulin levels drop, and when insulin levels drop, then those receptors stop becoming resistant to it. So a lot of people, will do a ketogenic diet just for a month or something, and they have a tremendous reversal and change in their insulin resistance.
Okay, Liza's asking, what time of day is best to test for ketones?
So your ketone levels are going to fluctuate and change. They're going to be lowest in the morning. Just know that that's a possible thing because your body has been using ketones all night. So sometimes ketone levels are low, not because you're not in ketosis, but your body has been using them. And also, right after you work out, your ketone levels may be a little bit low. So it's not necessarily the time of the day, but it's like what's happening to your body. If your body is put into a physiological state where it has to use ketones, so typically when you're asleep and first wake up, they're a little bit low, and typically when you exercise, they're going to be a little bit low because your body has used those ketones from this workout. So just be aware of that as you measure your ketones. Then the rest of the time, you can just check them and see how they are. Your best time to really check to see if you're in ketosis is have a meal, and then maybe like half an hour after that meal, just confirm you're actually in ketosis.
Okay, Elaine is asking, any possible connection between failing the alpha ketoglyceric acid challenge in your brain book and severe insomnia on keto, despite following it perfectly per all your specs? It's affecting 2 family members. Any possible connection between...
I don't know of any possible connection, so I'm going to say no. But I have the option to think about that more and change. Right now I'm saying no.
I'll write it down so you can think about it later. Okay.
Right? I don't think so.
Okay.
Okay.
How long will it take to correct insulin resistance with a keto diet?
Depends how severe the insulin resistance is. I mean, if the insulin resistance is to the point where they're diabetic and have high HbA1c, it would take longer than if they didn't have that and just had a little bit of postprandial insulin release or so forth. Most people will notice a dramatic change in their insulin function even after they stop ketogenic diet, even as short as 1 week or 2 weeks of being in ketosis.
Okay. Lisa, will a small amount of sugar, 1 to 2 teaspoons, prevent ketosis?
It's possible. I'm not sure what the dosage is, but simple sugars will just throw off metabolism. How long that lasts, I'm not sure. I would say in the immediate response, it's gonna throw someone off ketosis. How long that lasts and whether they can go back to ketosis, I really can't give you an accurate answer because I don't know if that's ever been published. But typically, it will cause an immediate shifting in metabolism right out of ketosis. How long that lasts, I don't know. But you'd have to kind of that's why it's important to check your own ketone levels and see how you respond and how you do. I would guess if you have a couple teaspoons of sugar, if you looked at your ketones like within the first half hour, you're not going to be in ketosis, and then you can measure how long it takes for you to get back into ketosis, and that would be your best way to know for your own body how it impacts you.
Okay. Can you address keto and intermittent fasting?
Yeah, so actually, when people do intermittent fasting, if let's say, for example, the most common type of intermittent fasting would be like a time-restricted fasting, where they fast for 18 hours and have a feeding window of 6 hours. They're actually in ketosis. So when people do intermittent fasting, they get into ketosis. When people do alternate day fasting, fast for a day, they get into ketosis. The reason some people have a hard time doing it is because their body doesn't have ketogenic efficiency. Their body doesn't know how to use ketones. So they try to do intermittent fasting and they totally crash and fall apart. But once people get into ketosis and the body gets used to using ketones, then for them to get into intermittent fasting, whichever type they do, is much, much easier. So I think we did a talk previously on intermittent fasting. We said one of the ways to transition into that without really having all the side effects and falling apart and crashing is make sure your body has some ketogenic adaptation by following ketosis for a while, and then it's much, much easier.
Yeah, it's 2 weeks ago I think you did that.
Yep.
Okay, and Chris is asking, how do thin people keep from losing too much weight on a ketogenic diet? If say they're going on it because they're still insulin resistant, like skinny fat.
Well, skinny fat's still a problem because this visceral adipose tissue is highly inflammatory and leads to serious diseases. So So skinny fat people, which means they don't have much muscle mass, and they look skinny, but when they actually do body composition tests, they're actually very fat. They really need to get muscle. And ketogenic diets and even intermittent fasting has been shown to not cause any muscle depletion. Long-term fasting will definitely deplete muscles. So ketogenic diet is not going. A ketogenic diet is there, and for those people, the most important thing for people that are skinny fat is they have to build muscle. Their health will have serious problems if they don't build muscle. There's some degree of muscle mass you need to have to be healthy, for lots of different reasons. But their fat isn't as big of an issue as that they're completely deprived of muscle. So they need to get some degree of physical fitness in so they can build muscle. That's more important than them losing fat. So that's just as the tip. And if they're in ketosis, they can definitely build muscle. They're having enough calories to be able to build muscle. So it's no problem.
Okay, Michelle's asking, what's the best alcohol drink? Is white wine okay?
The best alcohol drink is vodka.
It's a martini.
Preferably
a nice steak.
Olive oil with an extra virgin. Dirty martini.
There you go.
Not the sugar martinis. But it's still going to throw you out of ketosis for a period of time. But it's going to be much faster for you to get back in. So if you are in ketosis and you want to have a drink, vodka would be the easiest type of alcohol to have to be able to then get back into ketosis. Wine and beer will definitely completely throw you off and be hard to get back in. But
it's too much sugar.
Yeah, the sugar content. So vodka without any sugary things added to it is a way to go.
Olives.
Yeah. Okay, one last question.
Sure.
Or we're good.
I can. Someone's asking about what about nuts and seeds on a ketogenic diet?
Yes, nuts and seeds are permitted on a ketogenic diet. Just they're also very high in protein, so you got to be careful you're not eating so much nuts and seeds that you're eating too much protein versus fat. So nuts and seeds are definitely permitted as long as you don't react to them. Many people have autoimmunity, have some reactions to nuts, but if you're not reacting to nuts, it's definitely something you can do in the ketogenic diet to help you have snacks throughout the day and so forth.
Okay, this is being asked a lot.
Oh, really?
What is happening when LDL is going up high on keto? People are saying, I see this a lot.
Yep.
LDL goes up high on keto. What's going on?
Yeah, I've seen that happen too, and I don't have a good answer for that. There are some people who metabolize fats differently. Now, we know there's what are called hyperlipidproteinemias. There's 5 different types, and with some of the types 1 through 1, 2, and 3, and 5, you can have fats that actually increase levels like LDL, especially types 1 and 2. I would only guess that there's some subvariations of some gene uniquenesses that they may not have a full-blown type 1 or 2 hyperlipidproteinemia, but they have some inefficiency in metabolizing fats where their LDL levels go up. So with those individuals, you want to be maybe a little bit concerned, especially if their oxidized LDL goes up. LDL by itself going up is not as big of a factor unless it's oxidized. So if they really wanted, that was really a concern for them, you might want to measure oxidized LDL. And oxidized LDL is what really leads to plaquing and so forth. But also with a lot of these people that do have some of their cholesterol levels go up, if you actually look at their traditional cholesterol risk markers, like the total cholesterol HDL ratio, LDL HDL ratio, they don't actually have increased risk despite the numbers are a little bit up. So I think with some individuals that have that, they have some gene uniquenesses that make them process fats differently than most people. And if they're really concerned, measure oxidized LDL and then actually look at the ratios to see if they have any significant risk.
Can you please mention your websites?
Yes, thank you, Elaine, Susan, for reminding me. Yes, please check out our website, drknews, drknews.com. And we have articles on there. We have a couple online programs, one for the brain, one for immune tolerance. We're hoping to get some new programs available early next year. And we also, if you can follow us on this Facebook page, that would be great. Then we can get information to you when we do these talks and the topics all the time. And those are the main sites.
Yeah, I was just going to say also.
Oh, and then if you're a healthcare professional, we have the Kharrazian Institute, which provides postgraduate education. And we have all the previous courses on demand, so you can access them whenever you want. And we have an upcoming course on infertility next month.
Yeah. And if people want information on certain topics, when you go to DRK News, if you go to the search bar on the top, you can type in a word like homocysteine or something, and it pops up because it's the websites themselves are big. So it's kind
right. That's a good point. Andrea is saying that
I just figured
if you go to Dr. K News and if you have a specific topic like ketogenic diet or intermittent fasting or paleo or autoimmune or Hashimoto's, you can just do a search on our website and you can see all the articles we've written on it.
Yeah, it's nice.
So thank you for joining us, and really appreciate everyone's comments, and thank you for everyone's positive messages as well. I can see them all the time. I just can't respond because I'm trying to, give you information. But thank you. I do read them, and I really do appreciate them. Thank you, everyone.